The year was 1970. Elvis Presley was, as always, a whirlwind of velvet and glitter, roaring through Las Vegas with a magnetism that hadn't dimmed one bit since his legendary '68 comeback special. He was the king, still packing out showrooms, still selling millions of records, still the most recognizable face on the planet. But even kings, it turned out, weren't immune to the relentless grind of public scrutiny. In a plush, slightly over-the-top suite at the International Hotel, Elvis sat hunched over a plate of burnt bacon, looking less like a legend and more like a weary traveler. Around him, the usual chaotic symphony of his Memphis Mafia played out. Red West laughing loudly at a joke, Charlie Hodge tuning a guitar softly in the corner, Joe Esposito on the phone, probably coordinating another 1,000 logistics. Joe asked, walking over, holding a glossy magazine in one hand and a stack of fan mail in the other. He had a grimace on his face, the kind that usually meant trouble was brewing. Elvis grunted, pushing the bacon away. "What now, Joe?" "Another request for a scarf from some lady in Idaho." "Worse," Joe said, handing him the magazine. "It's about that Rex Sterling Hour show." Elvis took the magazine. The cover featured a slick-haired man with a shark-like smile. Rex Sterling. His show was notorious. Sterling wasn't just an interviewer, he was a provocateur. He specialized in digging for dirt, asking uncomfortable questions and often leaving his guests squirming. He was the kind of host who thrived on controversy, and his ratings soared every time he managed to make a celebrity look bad. "What about him?" Elvis asked, already feeling a knot tighten in his stomach. He'd seen a few clips of Sterling's show. The man had a way of turning even the most innocent answers into something scandalous. "He wants you on the show, Elvis. A prime-time special. Hour-long interview. Says it's a chance to really get to know the man behind the legend." Joe made air quotes around the last phrase, his skepticism clear. Elvis scoffed. "Get to know me, huh? More like get to embarrass me on national television." He remembered Sterling's interview with the famous movie star just last month. The actor had walked off set, furious. It had been Sterling's biggest rating coup of the year. "Exactly my thought," Joe agreed. "Colonel Parker is already saying no flat out. He thinks it's a trap. A publicity stunt designed to make you look bad." Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's manager, was a shrewd, often overprotective businessman. He guarded Elvis's image with the ferocity of a junkyard dog. If the colonel said no, it usually meant a hard no. But something in Elvis's eyes flickered. Picked up the magazine again, staring at Sterling's smirking face. "Trap, maybe. But what if it isn't?" he mused, more to himself than to Joe. "What if it's a chance to? I don't know. Talk to people. Really talk to them. Not just sing, not just act in some movie. Just me." Joe looked at him, surprised. "Elvis, you know how he operates. He'll twist your words, he'll bring up every old rumor, every bit of gossip. He'll make it sound like you're some kind of puppet." Elvis stood up, walked to the large window overlooking the strip, the neon lights already beginning to shimmer in the late afternoon sun. He'd been the king for so long, and with that title came a lot of assumptions. People thought he was untouchable, perfect, always in control. Sometimes he wanted to shatter that image, just a little, to show them the man underneath the rhinestones. "Maybe that's what I need, Joe," Elvis said, his voice low, thoughtful, "to show him I'm not a puppet, that I'm real, that I got feelings, that I ain't just some character from a movie screen." He turned back, a spark of defiance in his eyes. "Colonel Parker says no, but I'm saying yes. Call Sterling's people, tell him I'm in on one condition." Joe raised an eyebrow. "Condition?" "Yeah," Elvis said, a hint of his famous mischievous grin appearing. "No questions about my diet, and I get to sing if I want to. Just me and a guitar, not the whole band. Something real simple." Joe looked utterly bewildered. "Elvis, this is Rex Sterling we're talking about. He doesn't do real simple. He does sensational. Then maybe, Elvis said, his voice firm, it's time he learned how to. The decision hung in the air, heavy and audacious. Joe knew that once Elvis made up his mind, there was no changing it. He rubbed his temples, already envisioning the Colonel's explosive reaction. But he also saw the resolve in Elvis's eyes, a genuine desire to connect, to cut through the layers of fame and show the audience who he truly was. It was a risky move, perhaps even a foolish one, but it was also undeniably brave. All right, E? Joe sighed, pulling out his little black book. I'll make the call, but don't say I didn't warn you. When Sterling asks you about that time you accidentally dyed your hair green back in '57, Elvis actually laughed, a deep rumbling sound that filled the suite. Can ask all he wants about my green hair, Joe. As long as he's looking at my green hair, he ain't looking at his own. He walked back to the table, picking up a piece of the burnt bacon. He even took a bite. The nervousness was still there, a faint tremor beneath the surface, but it was now mixed with a sense of purpose. He was going into the lion's den, armed only with his charm and his truth. He knew it would be tough. But he was Elvis Presley, and he faced tougher crowds than Rex Sterling. The stage was set, the trap laid, and the king was walking right into it, head held high. The news of Elvis Presley agreeing to an exclusive hour-long interview on the Rex Sterling Hour spread like wildfire. The show's ratings skyrocketed with just the announcement. Pundits debated. Was this a smart move or a catastrophic mistake? The public was buzzing. Everyone knew Sterling's reputation. Everyone knew Elvis's. It was going to be a showdown, a clash of titans, and everyone wanted a front row seat. Elvis, meanwhile, spent the next few days in a quiet contemplation, rehearsing songs on his acoustic guitar. Not the rock and roll anthems, but the ballads, the gospel tunes, the ones that truly spoke to his soul. He was preparing not for a fight, but for a revelation. The day of the show arrived cloaked in a thick, nervous energy that crackled through the television studio. Backstage, at the Rex Sterling Hour, the atmosphere was a bizarre mix of chaos and hushed tension. Crew members darted around, checking cables, adjusting lights, and whispering into headsets. In one of the star dressing rooms, Elvis Presley sat unusually quiet. He was dressed simply, not in his usual flamboyant jumpsuits, but in a smart dark suit, a crisp white shirt, and a subtle scarf. He wanted to project seriousness, maturity, not just the sequin showman. Charlie Hodge was polishing one of Elvis's acoustic guitars nearby, the rich wood gleaming under the harsh dressing room lights. Joe Esposito paced like an expectant father, talking urgently on a phone about security details. Red West and Sonny West, Elvis's other loyal bodyguards, stood by the door, their faces set in grim lines. Colonel Parker called again, Joe announced, hanging up the phone with a frustrated sigh. He's still furious. Elvis says this is professional suicide. He thinks Sterling is going to tear you apart. Elvis just nodded, running a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair. The Colonel worries too much. Joe, what's the worst that can happen? He calls me a hillbilly. I already know I'm a hillbilly, a rich one. He tried to joke, but his voice lacked its usual booming confidence. He's going to dig for dirt, Elvis Red said, his voice grave. He's going to bring up every little thing he can find. The movies, the critics, the fans who say you've changed. He'll try to make you look like a fool. And what if I just don't let him? Elvis mused, looking into the mirror, not at his own reflection, but through it, as if searching for something deeper. What if I just tell the truth about how I feel about my music, about the fans, about everything? Charlie walked over, gently handing him the guitar. It's ready. You sound sweet. Elvis took the guitar, his fingers automatically finding a familiar chord. The worn wood felt comforting in his hands. This was his sanctuary, his truest voice. You know, I ain't never been good at talking about myself, Elvis confessed, strumming a soft melody. Always been easier to just sing it. Let the music speak. Joe stopped pacing. Well, tonight you're going to have to do both. E. Sterling's assistant just came by. He wants to confirm. You won't be bringing an entourage on stage. Just you. Just me, Elvis repeated, a faint smile playing on his lips. Good, that's how it should be. No safety net. Just me and him, and the audience. The crew outside the dressing room door seemed to grow quieter as the minutes ticked by. Everyone knew what Rex Sterling was capable of. His reputation preceded him. He was known for his predatory charm, his ability to make guests feel comfortable just before he pounced. A young production assistant, looking pale and nervous, tapped softly on the door. Mr. Presley, Mr. Sterling would like to speak with you for a moment before the show. Just a quick hello. Joe and Red exchanged wary glances. He wants to size you up, E. Joe rose, setting the guitar carefully aside. He took a deep breath, smoothing down his suit jacket. All right, let's go say hello to the man who thinks he knows me. He walked out of the dressing room, his posture regal, his steps deliberate. Production assistant led him down a short corridor to another, even larger dressing room. Inside, Rex Sterling sat surrounded by his own team of slick-haired producers and assistants. Sterling rose as Elvis entered, a broad, almost too friendly smile stretching across his face. He was taller than Elvis expected, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Mr. Presley, so glad you could make it, Sterling boomed, extending a hand. His grip was firm, almost challenging. Such an honor to have the king on the Rex Sterling hour. Mr. Sterling, Elvis replied, his voice calm, polite. Heard a lot about your show. Glad to finally see what all the fuss is about. Sterling chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Oh, I assure you, Mr. Presley, tonight will be quite the fuss. We have a lot to talk about. A lot of questions the public wants, answered the real Elvis Presley, not just a one on stage. Elvis held his gaze. Well, Mr. Sterling, I'm an open book. Always have been. What you see is what you get. Sterling's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. We shall see, Mr. Presley, we shall see. Just a few minutes until showtime. Break a leg. As Elvis turned to leave, Sterling added almost as an afterthought. Oh, and lovely suit. Quite understated for the king. Are you trying to shed the rhinestone image tonight? Elvis paused, but he didn't turn around. Just wearin' what feels right, Mr. Sterling. Tonight I guess that's just me. He walked back to his dressing room, the exchange, leaving a slightly bitter taste in his mouth. Sterling was sharper, more calculating than he'd anticipated. That last comment was a clear jab, a hint of the condescension to come. He's playing mind games. E. Joe said, seeing the look on Elvis's face. I know, Elvis replied, sitting back down. Picked up his guitar again, his fingers unconsciously finding the melancholy notes of Can't Help Falling in Love. He strummed softly, his eyes far away. Charlie looked at him, then at Joe. He'll be fine. He's the king. But the quiet determination in Elvis's eyes was mixed with a flicker of vulnerability. He wasn't preparing for a performance tonight, he was preparing for a battle. And the weapon he chose to wield wasn't a dazzling voice or a hip-shaking move, but something far more fragile and powerful, his own authentic self. The countdown had begun. The studio audience buzzed with an almost feverish anticipation. They were packed into every seat, spilling into the aisles, craning their necks for a glimpse of the stage. The air was thick with excitement, a mixture of awe for the legend they were about to see and morbid curiosity about how Rex Sterling would handle him. A booming voice over the loudspeakers announced, Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Rex Sterling Hour. Tonight we have a very special guest, a living legend, a phenomenon like no other. Get ready for an exclusive, no-holds-barred interview with the king himself, Elvis Presley. Applause, screams, whistles, a deafening roar that vibrated through the floorboards. Rex Sterling strode onto the stage, a confident, almost arrogant smirk on his face. He soaked in the adulation, milking it for all it was worth, before raising his hands for quiet. Thank you, thank you. Sterling's voice was smooth, resonant, perfect for television. It's a truly historic night, folks. We have someone here tonight who has defined an era, captivated millions, and whose very name is synonymous with rock and roll. Camera panned to a backstage monitor showing a live feed of Elvis walking from his dressing room down the corridor towards the stage. The audience cheered louder. Elvis appeared calm, composed, a slight smile on his face as he waved to the cheering crowd. He walked with that familiar swagger. Yet there was a subtle difference tonight, a quiet dignity that was almost palpable. As he reached the stage, the applause reached a fever pitch. Elvis stood there, bathed in the bright studio lights, looking out at the sea of faces. He felt the energy, the love from the fans, and it gave him a surge of strength. He nodded a polite greeting to Sterling, who gestured expansively to a plush armchair opposite his own. "Elvis, welcome to the Rex Sterling Hour," Sterling said, extending a hand as Elvis sat down. "It's truly an honor to have you here." "Thank you, Rex," Elvis replied, his voice a low, warm baritone. "Good to be here." Sterling leaned back, his eyes scrutinizing Elvis with an almost unsettling intensity. "King live in our studio. I must say, Elvis, you look well. You look exactly as one would expect the king to look, perfectly coiffed, perfectly tailored. Is it exhausting, maintaining that image?" It was the first subtle jab. "I reckon it's just part of the job, Rex. Folks expect a certain something when they come to see Elvis. I try to give it to them." "And you certainly do," Sterling said, his voice dripping with faux admiration. "From those early days in Tupelo cutting your first records at Sun Studios to the explosion of Heartbreak Hotel and Hound Dog, you became an overnight sensation. But then came the movies, didn't they? Over 30 of them." He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. Many critics had dismissed Elvis's movies as lightweight formulaic, and beneath his musical talent it was a common point of contention. "Yes, sir," Elvis responded evenly. "A lot of movies. It was a different kind of work, a learning experience. Some might say it was a departure, though, wouldn't they?" Sterling pressed, his tone shifting. "From the raw, rebellious rock. He wasn't go pro-vrai. Were you ever concerned? You were losing your edge, becoming sin-eyed." The audience. "Rex music changes. Artists tried to do the best I could with what was put in front of me. Every song, every movie, I tried to give it my all, and I learned something from every one of them. Even Clambake." Sterling quipped, a slight smirk playing on his lips. The audience chuckled nervously, a few bolder ones even laughing. Elvis chuckled too, a genuine, unaffected sound. "Even Clambake, Rex, especially Clambake. Took a lot of hard work to make that boat sink just right." He winked at the camera. A ripple of appreciative laughter went through the audience. Elvis had deflected the jab with humor, turning Sterling's snide remark into a light-hearted moment. Sterling's smirk tightened almost imperceptibly. He hadn't expected that. "Very clever," Elvis Sterling said, his tone still smooth but with a hint of something sharper beneath. "But let's talk about the music. For a long time it seemed you were content with those movie soundtracks. Then came the '68 comeback special, a stunning return to form. Many called it a rebirth. Did you had lost your way?" This was a more direct attack, questioning his artistic integrity, implying he'd been adrift. Elvis looked directly at Sterling, his eyes serious now. And yes, it felt good to feel that fire again. To stand up there and just be me, playing my music. His voice was earnest, heartfelt. The audience was quiet now, listening intently, sensing the sincerity in his words. Sterling, however, leaned forward, ready to pounce. He wasn't interested in sincerity. He was just getting warmed up. The tension in the studio wasn't just a buzz anymore. It was a hum, a low, vibrating note that filled every corner of the room. Rex Sterling leaned forward, his polished facade barely concealing the sharpened edge of his questions. He wasn't interested in a heartwarming chat. He wanted headlines, and controversy's soul. "You talk about the fans, Elvis," Sterling began, his voice smooth as silk, but with a barely perceptible tremor of condescension. "And certainly you have millions, loyal, adoring fans, but there have always been those who criticize. Haven't there those who said your music was crude, that your stage performances were, well, scandalous?" He paused, letting the word scandalous hang in the air like a bad smell. "The famous Pelvis's nickname, for example, your gyrations on stage, seen by many as highly suggestive, even offensive, back in the day. Did you ever worry that you were corrupting the youth of America?" Question was a classic Sterling tactic. Dredge up old controversies. Present them as if they were current moral failings. The audience murmured, some looking uncomfortable, others leaning in, eager to see how Elvis would react. Elvis's expression remained calm, though a flicker of something unreadable passed through his eyes. He remembered those early days, the outrage, the fear of parents, the preachers condemning him from pulpits. He remembered the thrill of the music, the way it moved him, and how it moved others. "Rex," Elvis said, his voice quiet but firm, "when I started out, I was just a young man from Mississippi who loved music. I heard something inside me, something that made me want to move. It wasn't playing the music, pure and simple." He looked out at the audience, his gaze sweeping over the rows of faces. "And you know, back then, rock and roll was new, it was loud, it was different. Anything new and different. Folks tend to get a little nervous about it, especially adults, when it comes to their kids." He gave a small, understanding smile. "But I never set out to offend nobody. I just set out to sing my songs the way they felt right to me." Sterling smirked. "But it made you famous, didn't it? That controversy? Some would say it was a calculated move. That rebellion you projected, it sold records." Elvis's smile vanished, replaced by a look of genuine hurt. His sincerity was palpable. They could feel the truth in his words, the quiet dignity. Sterling, sensing that this line of attack wasn't yielding the desired outrage, pivoted. "All right, let's move on to your movies then. 31 films, a massive output. Yet many critics dismissed them as lightweight, formulaic, designed simply to make money. Some even suggested you were selling out your musical talent for Hollywood paychecks." This was another common criticism and a sore spot for Elvis. He genuinely enjoyed making movies, but he knew many of them weren't artistic masterpieces. "Well, Rex, movies are a different animal than music," Elvis began, choosing his words carefully. "When I went to Hollywood, I was just a country boy. I wanted to learn to groove. And sure, some of those movies, they might not have been what folks expected from me. From the king of rock and roll, I felt like I was entertaining them the best way I knew how at the time." He paused again, a wistful look in his eyes. "Sometimes when you're doing something for a long time, it changes. You try new things, you evolve. Not every decision is perfect, but you learn from it." He projected an air of humble reflection, a world weariness that only someone who had lived under intense public scrutiny could understand. The audience watched him, captivated not by controversy, but by his quiet honesty. They saw not a defiant superstar, but a man reflecting on his life and choices with genuine humility. Sterling, however, wasn't satisfied. He wanted fireworks, not introspection. He leaned back in his chair, a calculating glint in his eye. "So you're saying you have no regrets then? No film you wish you hadn't made? No song you wish you hadn't sung? No decision you wish you could take back in a career that has been, shall we say, rather managed?" The word managed was a clear dig at Colonel Parker, and by extension, at Elvis's perceived lack of control over his own career. It was meant to irritate, to provoke. This was Sterling's specialty, pushing until a crack appeared, the first jab was delivered. Now, Sterling was waiting for Elvis to reel, to stumble, to show weakness. The tension in the studio tightened as everyone waited to see if Elvis would finally lose his cool. Rex Sterling's smile was unwavering, but his eyes were like cold steel. He'd thrown the word managed out there, a thinly veiled accusation that Elvis was merely a puppet manipulated by his infamous manager, Colonel Tom Parker. Elvis's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained steady. Rex, I've had a manager, yes. Colonel Parker has been with me since the beginning, and he's done a lot for my career. He's a smart man, but when it comes to my music, to what I do on stage, to what I feel in my heart, that's always been me. Always. Nobody can make you stand up there and give it your all if your heart ain't in it. Everything I've ever done, whether it was good or bad in folks' eyes, came from a place of wanting to entertain, wanting to connect, and wanting to make the best music I could. Sterling chuckled. A dry, dismissive sound. Some would argue, Elvis, that your connection has become rather exclusive, moving from the raw energy of live tours to the glitz of Las Vegas. High-priced showrooms, fixed engagements. Does it not feel a little removed from the common man? A bit like you're singing to the elite now. This was a particularly sharp barb, implying Elvis had abandoned his roots and the working-class fans who had made him a star. The audience stirred, some looking uncomfortable with the line of questioning. Vegas is a different kind of show, Rex, Elvis explained patiently. It's a different atmosphere, but the love for the music, for the people that's still there every night. I see faces in the crowd from all walks of life. Folks save up their hard-earned money to come see me, and I appreciate that more than words can say. He saw that Elvis wasn't going to get defensive. He was just going to explain calmly and sincerely. This wasn't the fiery rock star he'd hoped to provoke. All right, let's talk about the image then, Sterling continued, his voice taking on a slightly more mocking tone. The jumpsuits, the high collars, the capes, they become legendary, of course. Iconic, but some might also say excessive. Out of touch with the changing times. The 70s are here, Elvis. Bell bottoms and tie-dye. Does it not feel a bit anachronistic, like you're living in a time capsule? This was a direct attack on Elvis's personal style, and by extension, his relevance. It was designed to make him seem old-fashioned, a relic of a bygone era. Elvis finally let out a soft sigh, a hint of weariness creeping into his posture. He looked down at his hands, then back up at Sterling. Rex, clothes are just clothes. I wear what feels good, what feels right. For the stage. Those jumpsuits, they're for the show. They're part of the experience when you walk out on that stage in Vegas. You're not just a man with a guitar. You're putting on a spectacle. And as for out of touch, I still got fans. Rex folks still come to my shows. They still buy my records, and they don't come to see me in a t-shirt and jeans. They come to see Elvis. And Elvis wears a jumpsuit. There was a gentle defiance in his voice, a hint that he was comfortable in his own skin regardless of public opinion. The audience chuckled again, but this time it was a sound of appreciation, not nervous laughter. They were starting to see past Sterling's calculated provocations and into the genuine man beneath. Sterling, growing visibly frustrated, decided to go for a deeper cut. Many people say you've become isolated. Elvis, that the Memphis Mafia around you, the close-knit circle of friends, shields you from the elted cage. Is it true that you rarely go out in public anymore? That you're protected from the realities that the rest of us live in? This was aimed at painting Elvis as a recluse out of touch with reality, even a prisoner of his own fame. It was a common rumor, fueled by the intensely private nature of his life outside of performing. Elvis looked at the floor for a moment, then up at Sterling, his eyes showing a flash of something akin to sadness. They're the people I trust, the people who know me for, who I really am. Not just the king. His voice was soft, vulnerable, a stark contrast to the booming stage persona. The audience was completely silent now, hanging on his every word. They sensed the honesty, the pain of a man who lived a life most could only dream of, yet carried a burden of loneliness that fame often brought. Sterling had dug deep, but instead of finding anger or bitterness, He was uncovering something far more profound, a quiet, aching humanity, and it was disarming. Rex Sterling could feel the audience slipping away from him. His usual tactics, the snide remarks, the loaded questions were being met with Elvis's calm, almost serene. Honesty he needed to hit harder. He needed a moment that would make Elvis flinch, that would expose a raw nerve. He decided to go personal. Elvis Sterling began, his voice taking on a feigned tone of concern. Your private life has always been a subject of immense fascination, and of course there's your marriage to Priscilla, a beautiful woman, a loving wife, and now the mother of your daughter, Lisa. The temperature in the studio seemed to drop 10 degrees. The audience gasped a collective intake of breath. This was it. This was the low blow, bringing up his private life, his marriage, his daughter. It was a sacred line for Elvis. Even Joe Esposito, watching from the wings, tensed, ready to rush out if Elvis reacted badly. Elvis's face, which had been so composed, finally showed a crack. His jaw visibly tightened, and his eyes, which had held such a warm, gentle light, now narrowed, a flash of genuine hurt and anger passing through them. For a split second, everyone saw it. The vulnerable man, not the untouchable king. Rex, Elvis said, his voice low, barely above a whisper, yet resonating with a dangerous calm. My family is my family. My wife, my daughter, they are sacred to me. They are the most important thing in my life. Took a slow, deliberate breath, visibly composing himself. What happens behind closed doors in my home with my loved ones? That ain't for public consumption, that ain't part of the show. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering, cutting directly through Sterling's polished smile. And I resent the implication, sir, that my marriage, or my love for my daughter, is anything but real. That's a line, Rex, and you just crossed it. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by a few nervous coughs from the audience. Sterling, for the first time, looked genuinely taken aback. He hadn't expected such a direct, quiet rebuke, or the raw emotion that flashed in Elvis's eyes. He had expected anger, maybe a walk-off, not this dignified hurt condemnation. I apologize if I offended you, Elvis Sterling stammered, recovering quickly, though his usual smooth delivery was noticeably ruffled. I'm simply asking the questions that are on the public's mind. Public's mind, Rex, Elvis countered, his voice still low but now laced with a quiet authority, is often filled with rumors and gossip, spun by people who don't know the truth. My truth in my family is love and respect. Always has been. He paused, then looked out at the audience again, his expression softening slightly. You know, folks always see the bright lights, the big shows, the cars, the mansion. They see the king. And I'm grateful for all of it, truly. But behind all that, there's just a man who loves his family. He looked back at Sterling, a melancholic expression in his eyes. It ain't easy, Rex, living under a microscope. Every little thing you do, every rumor, it gets magnified. And sometimes it hurts, especially when it touches the ones you care about most. The audience was no longer watching a celebrity interview. They were witnessing a man's vulnerable heart laid bare. They felt the sting of Sterling's cruel question, and their sympathy for Elvis swelled. A few women in the front rows teared up. Sterling, sensing the shift in the audience's mood, tried to pivot again, to regain control. Of course, Elvis, I understand. Fame comes with a prices, your extravagant lifestyle. The cars, the planes, Graceland itself. Some might cough. Pum might cough. Fum might call it. It was another attempt to paint him negatively, as materialistic and out of touch. But after the personal attack, this felt almost petty. Elvis, however, didn't miss a beat. His earlier pain seemed to have solidified into a quiet strength. He looked at Sterling, and then for the first time, a genuine sad smile touched his lips. Rex, I came from nothing. I mean, literally nothing. We were poor. real poor. My mama and daddy worked harder than anyone you ever met just to put food on the table. He gestured around the lavish set. Everything I have, everything I've been blessed with, I never take it for granted, and I share it. I share it with my family, with my friends, and I try to give back, too. I help folks when I can. I've never forgotten where I came from, his gaze piercing. And you know what, Rex? If a boy from Tupelo, Mississippi can work his tail off and sing his heart out and make a life for himself and his family, I don't think there's anything to feel guilty about there. I think that's the American dream, ain't it? The audience, already swayed by his previous vulnerability, now felt a wave of admiration. He wasn't arrogant, he was humble. He wasn't denying his wealth. He was putting it in context of his origins and his hard work. Sterling had tried for the knockout blow, but instead of felling his opponent, he had only revealed Elvis's deeper, more resilient core. The king, far from being embarrassed, was slowly, quietly, winning over every single person in the room. The applause that followed Elvis's response about his origins was louder, more genuine than any of the nervous chuckles Sterling had managed to elicit. The audience was no longer passive observers. They were engaged. Their emotions now clearly aligned with Elvis. Sterling could feel it, a palpable shift in the air, a loss of control he was unaccustomed to. He tried to recover, to pivot back to his planned line of attack, but his usual confidence seemed to waver. Right, well, a testament to the American dream, indeed, Sterling mumbled, trying to regain his composure. But surely, Elvis, with all this success, all this adoration, there must be moments of loneliness, of doubt. Are you always as confident as you appear on stage? Was a last-ditch effort to find a crack, to reveal a flaw that would make Elvis seem less than perfect, but Elvis saw it not as an attack, but as an opening, an opportunity to truly connect. Elvis looked at Sterling, then slowly, deliberately turned his gaze to sweep across the audience, meeting as many eyes as he could. His voice softened, taking on a reflective quality. Rex, you know, being up on stage, it's a powerful thing when I hear those folks cheer, when I see their faces light up, when I feel that connection, when I feel like I'm flying. That's where I feel strongest. He paused, a wistful smile touching his lips. But yeah, offstage it's different. It can be lonely, real lonely sometimes. The shows are over, the lights are off, and you go back to a quiet room and you start thinking. He sighed softly. You think about whether you did enough, whether you gave him everything you had. You worry about the future. You worry about staying relevant. You worry about whether people still care. His voice was raw, vulnerable, stripped of all artifice. It was a confession that resonated deeply with everyone, for who hadn't felt doubt or loneliness, regardless of their station in life? The audience leaned forward, completely captivated. They weren't seeing the king anymore. They were seeing a man just like them, grappling with universal emotions. Every artist, every person goes through those moments, Elvis continued, his voice gaining strength, not from defiance, but from profound honesty. It's part of being human, and it's those doubts, those quiet moments, that make you appreciate the good times even more. They make you appreciate the love you get from people, from the fans. He looked around the studio again, his gaze lingering on individual faces. And that's why I do this, Rex. That's why I still get up on stage, night after night. It ain't just for the money or the fame. It's for that connection. It's for the folks who've been with me from the beginning, the ones who stuck by me through thick and thin. His eyes shone with a genuine emotion that pierced through the television cameras and into every living room, watching. When I look out there, I don't just see a crowd. I see individuals. I see families. I see people who've welcomed my music into their homes, into their lives. And that's a powerful thing, a real honor. Sterling, for the first time in the interview, looked genuinely uncomfortable. His prepared questions, his cynical barbs, seemed utterly inadequate in the face of such profound sincerity. He saw the audience no longer looking at him for entertainment, but at Elvis with tears in some of their eyes. He had tried to expose a manufactured product, but instead he had helped reveal a genuine soul. A woman in the front row, clearly moved, called out, "We love you, Elvis." Another voice chimed in, "We'll always be here." Elvis smiled, a true, heartfelt smile that reached his eyes. "And I love all y'all too, more than you'll ever know." The warmth in the studio was palpable. Sterling saw his chance at a scandalous interview, crumbling, transforming into something far more intimate and real than he had ever intended. He tried to interrupt, to regain the cynical edge. "So, Elvis, you're saying it's just pure love for your fans? Nothing more, nothing less?" But Elvis wasn't looking at Sterling anymore. He was looking at the audience, his mind clearly somewhere else. He gestured towards Charlie Hodge, who was standing just off stage, holding the acoustic guitar. "You know, Rex," Elvis said, his voice now imbued with a quiet sense of purpose, "sometimes words just ain't enough. Sometimes you gotta say it with music." He looked at Charlie, a silent signal passing between them. Charlie immediately understood and walked over, handing Elvis the guitar. The simple act felt momentous. The audience gasped, then erupted into whispers of excitement. Sterling's face was a mask of surprise and annoyance. He hadn't authorized a musical number, especially not an impromptu one, but it was too late. Elvis had already taken the guitar, settling it comfortably in his lap. The stage lights seemed to soften, focusing entirely on him. He strummed a few gentle chords, the sound filling the studio rich and pure. It was the beginning of the turnaround, a moment of pure, unadulterated charm that would erase any doubt Rex Sterling had tried to sow. King was about to sing, not for show, but from the very depths of his soul. The moment Elvis took the acoustic guitar, a hush fell over the studio audience. The buzz of conversation died down, replaced by an almost reverent silence. Even Rex Sterling, clearly frustrated by this unplanned turn of events, could only watch, momentarily speechless. He hadn't budgeted for a spontaneous performance. Certainly not one that seemed designed to completely undermine his carefully constructed narrative. Elvis ignored Sterling's tense posture. He was focused only on the guitar, his fingers plucking a soft, familiar melody. It wasn't a loud, raucous rock and roll tune. It was a ballad, a hymn almost, that seemed to emerge from the very core of his being. The first notes of "Can't Help Falling in Love" filled the air, stripped bare of any orchestral accompaniment, just Elvis's voice and his guitar. His voice was a revelation. It wasn't the powerful theatrical voice of his Vegas performances. It was softer, more nuanced, filled with a raw, almost heartbreaking tenderness. Every note was infused with genuine emotion, reflecting the vulnerability and sincerity he had just shared with the audience. "Wise men say only fools rush in," he sang, his eyes closed for a moment, lost in the music. "But I can't help falling in love with you." He opened his eyes, and his gaze swept over the audience. He wasn't performing for them. He was singing to them, sharing a piece of himself. Each word seemed to be directed at the collective heart of the room, a quiet testament to the connection he valued so deeply. "Shall I stay? Would it be a sin?" His voice cracked slightly on the word sin, adding a layer of poignant vulnerability. "If I can't help falling in love with you." The audience was mesmerized. Several women openly wept, wiping tears from their eyes. Men sat rigid, captivated, their earlier skepticism replaced by a profound respect. They were not just listening to a song. They were experiencing an emotional outpouring. This wasn't the king of rock and roll. It was a man, bare and unvarnished, expressing a universal yearning for connection and love. He continued through the verses, his voice building slightly, but never losing its intimate quality. The strumming of his guitar was simple, yet perfectly complemented the heartfelt lyrics. He seemed to forget the cameras, forget Rex Sterling, forget the millions watching at home. It was just him, his guitar, and the powerful, unspoken dialogue between an artist and his devoted listeners. When he reached the bridge, his voice swelled with a controlled passion. "Like a river flows surely to the sea, darling, so it goes. Some things are meant to be." He paused, letting the last words hang in the air, then looked directly into the camera. "Some things are meant to be," he repeated softly, almost a whisper, as if sharing a secret with each person watching. He looked back at the audience, his eyes shining with unshed tears, but also with a profound sense of peace. "Take my hand. Take my whole life, too," he sang, his voice trembling slightly with emotion. "For I can't help falling in love with you." He let the last chord ring out, a sustained, gentle vibration that seemed to fill every corner of the studio. When the last note faded, the silence was even more profound than before. For a long moment, no one moved, no one clapped. They were too moved, too overwhelmed. Then a single person in the audience, unable to contain their emotions, started to clap. It was a hesitant sound at first. Then another joined and another until the entire studio erupted in a thunderous standing ovation. It wasn't just polite applause. It was an outpouring of raw, visceral emotion. People were on their feet, cheering, shouting, some reaching out their hands towards the stage as if to touch him. Elvis looked out at them, his eyes wide, clearly touched by their reaction. He hadn't expected such an overwhelming response. A genuine, humble smile spread across his face, and he nodded a silent thank you to each and every person. Rex Sterling, who had been sitting frozen, his face a mixture of shock and fury, finally moved. He cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "Well, that was quite a moment, Elvis," he said, his voice strained almost gravelly, an unexpected but certainly heartfelt performance. But his words were drowned out by the renewed roar of the audience. They weren't interested in Sterling's commentary. They were captivated by Elvis, who had just shared a piece of his soul with them. He had turned the tables not with anger or defiance, but with vulnerability and pure, unadulterated love, delivered through the universal language of music. King had won, not by fighting, but by opening his heart. The standing ovation continued, deafening and heartfelt. The audience wasn't just clapping. They were cheering, stamping their feet, some shouting, "We love you, Elvis," and "You're the best." Rex Sterling's attempts to interject were futile. His voice lost in the wave of adoration, his face was a mask of professional shock and personal frustration. This was not how his show was supposed to go. Elvis, still holding his guitar, stood up slowly, a genuine humble smile gracing his lips. He looked out at the sea of faces, overwhelmed by the outpouring of love. He saw tears, cheers, and unwavering support. It was a far cry from the tense, skeptical energy he'd felt at the beginning of the interview. He lifted a hand, not to silence them, but to acknowledge them, to share in the moment. "Thank you," he said, his voice a little hoarse with emotion, though still amplified by the microphone. "Thank you all. That means more than you'll ever know." He set his guitar down gently against his chair and stepped closer to the edge of the stage. Almost as if to bridge the distance between himself and the audience. He wasn't performing now. He was simply connecting. "You know," Elvis continued, his voice softer, more conversational, "sometimes folks forget, with all the hoopla and the lights, that it's all about the people. It's about y'all, every single one of you." A man in the third row, emboldened by the moment, called out, "You're a good man, Elvis. Don't let him tell you different." He gestured dismissively toward Sterling. A ripple of agreement went through the crowd, some even booing. Sterling, subtly, Sterling visibly, winced, his face flushing. Tried to speak into his microphone, but it seemed his voice was no match for the spontaneous eruption of love for Elvis. Elvis chuckled softly, a genuine warm sound. "Well, I just try to be, and I appreciate you saying that." He pointed to a woman holding a small hand-painted sign that read, "Elvis is love." "I see you there, ma'am. That sign that means a lot to me, it really does." He wasn't just charming them. He was truly seeing them, acknowledging their presence, their devotion. He made eye contact with dozens of people in the front rows, a personal connection forged in the heat of the moment. "I know sometimes folks get the wrong idea," Elvis continued, his voice filled with a quiet earnestness. "They see the rumors, the headlines, they think they know everything. But what y'all just saw, that song that's from the heart, That's who I am. And that's what I want you to remember. Paused, looking directly at the camera. A silent message to the millions watching at home. I love to sing. I love to entertain. But more than anything, I love the people who made all this possible. The people who stuck with me through all these years. The audience, sensing the depth of his feeling, roared again. Their applause was a wall of sound, a shield protecting him from any further attacks. Sterling, completely outmaneuvered, stood awkwardly by his desk shuffling papers, unable to regain control of his show. He tried to force a smile, but it looked more like a grimace. The director, clearly sensing the moment had shifted beyond Sterling's control, began signaling for a commercial break. Sterling, desperate to salvage some semblance of authority, finally cut in, his voice sounding thin and forced over the residual applause. All right, folks, all right. A truly remarkable segment with Elvis Presley. We'll be right back after this short break. He tried to sound authoritative, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. As the lights dimmed for the break, Elvis remained on stage, waving to the audience, blowing kisses. People surged forward, trying to reach him, their faces alight with emotion. Security guards quickly formed a perimeter, but Elvis reached out, shaking a few hands, his smile radiant. Joe Esposito rushed onto the stage, a look of immense relief and pride on his face. That was incredible," he whispered, patting Elvis on the back. "You completely disarmed him." Elvis just shook his head, a thoughtful look in his eyes. "It wasn't about disarming him, Joe. It was about talking to the people, really talking to them, and letting them know they matter." He looked back at the audience, still cheering and waving even during the commercial break. They had come to see the king, perhaps to witness a public humiliation, but instead they had seen something far more powerful, the heart of a man who genuinely loved them back. And in their collective embrace, Elvis Presley had not only won over the entire audience, but had reaffirmed his place as their beloved king. As the show returned from the commercial break, Rex Sterling was clearly rattled. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by a forced, almost nervous energy. He tried to steer the conversation back to more mundane topics, like Elvis's upcoming tour schedule. But the earlier raw vulnerability and the powerful performance had changed everything. The audience was no longer just a passive group. They were a protective, adoring entity. "So, Elvis, what's next for the king?" Sterling asked, trying to sound jovial, but his eyes darted around, avoiding Elvis's direct gaze. "More Vegas residencies. Any new movie projects on the horizon?" Elvis, however, was done playing Sterling's game. He answered politely but briefly, his focus remaining on the connection he had established with the audience. He leaned forward, not to answer Sterling, but to address the broader room. "You know, for me," Elvis said, his voice warm and resonant, "it's always about the music, about finding new ways to connect with y'all, to bring that joy, that feeling to folks out there." He gestured to the cameras. "Whether it's in a big showroom, or on a record, or just sitting here with a guitar, it's all about reaching out, about sharing a piece of your soul." Sterling tried to interrupt. "Indeed, a beautiful sentiment, Elvis, but let's talk logistics." But Elvis held up a hand, a gentle, regal gesture that instantly silenced Sterling. "And I want to thank all the folks out there watching," he continued, looking directly into the camera again, "for sticking with me through all these years, for your loyalty, your love. It means more to me than words can ever say." He smiled, a genuine, humble smile that softened his famous features. "Some folks think being the king means you're above everybody, but really it means you're here to serve the music and to serve the people who listen to it. And I promise you, as long as I got breath in my body, I'm gonna keep doing just that." The audience erupted in applause again, even before the last words left his lips. This time, it was a sound of unwavering loyalty and profound respect. Sterling, seeing the writing on the wall, decided to cut his losses. "Well, folks, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for tonight," Sterling announced, his voice sounding hollow and defeated. He tried to force a triumphant closing, but it rang false. "Truly unforgettable evening with the one, the only, Elvis Presley. Thank you, Elvis, for joining us." Elvis stood up, offered a polite nod to Sterling, but then turned fully to the audience. He blew kisses, waved, and then, as the end credits began to roll, he stepped off the stage, walking directly towards the audience members in the front rows. Security guards immediately moved to protect him, but Elvis gently pushed past them, reaching out his hands. The crowd surged forward, eager to touch him, to tell him how much they loved him. He shook hands, exchanged quick, heartfelt words, and allowed himself to be momentarily surrounded by the love he had so openly embraced. "You were wonderful, Elvis," a woman cried, tears streaming down her face. "You showed him," another man shouted, giving a thumbs up. "Thank you for being real," a young girl called out, her voice trembling. Elvis smiled, soaking in every word, every touch. He felt a likeness he hadn't felt in a long time. The weight of expectations, the constant scrutiny, the cynical barbs, they had all melted away under the warmth of genuine human connection. He wasn't just a performer. He was a friend, a confidant, a symbol of hope and authenticity. Finally, Joe Esposito in Red West gently guided him away from the throng through a side exit and into the waiting limousine. As the car pulled away from the studio, Elvis looked out the window, watching the blur of city lights. "You were incredible," Joe said, shaking his head in disbelief. "You walked into a lion's den, and you turned that lion into a kitten." Elvis leaned back in the plush seat, a thoughtful expression on his face. "It ain't about taming no lions, Joe. It's about being true to yourself, about not letting nobody tell you who you are, or what you feel." He looked at Joe, a quiet strength in his eyes. "Sterling wanted to embarrass me. He wanted to make me look foolish or fake. But all he did was give me a chance to show folks who I really am, to show them the man behind the lights in the songs." He chuckled softly. "And you know what? That felt real good indeed." The sting of Sterling's questions was long forgotten, replaced by the profound warmth of the audience's love. He knew the newspapers would have a field day tomorrow, dissecting the interview, analyzing Sterling's defeat. But for Elvis, the real victory wasn't in winning a debate. It was in connecting genuinely with the hearts of the people who mattered most. The king had not been embarrassed. He had been revealed. And in that revelation, his charm, his humility, and his unwavering love for his fans had shone brighter than any spotlight, solidifying his reign not just as a performer, but as a genuine beloved. He may